Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. The terror attack on the Air Force base in Pathankot has raised several pressing questions for the Indian authorities. Amongst the most serious are those that focus on India's relationship with Pakistan. On Christmas Day, Mr. Modi made a dramatic visit to Lahore, which many believe strengthened the comprehensive bilateral dialogue the two countries had already agreed on. Many saw it as a possible turning point. But a week later, the Pathankot attack has raised serious questions about these talks, what they will lead to, and indeed whether they should happen at all. Much depends on Pakistan's response, but at the end of the day, this is also a test to Mr. Modi's personal mettle, as well as his individual conviction. Tonight, we focus on this key issue. My guests are former Foreign Secretary Krishnan Srinivasan, former High Commissioner to Pakistan Satyabrat Pal, Pakistan's former High Commissioner to India Ashraf Jahangir Qazi, the former head of RNAW A.S. Dullat, BJP National Executive Member Sheshadri Chari, and Congress MP and spokesperson Abhishek Singhvi. Krishnan Srinivasan, let me start with a simple, but some would say obvious question. On the one hand, the terror attack like the one in Pathankot was widely expected after Mr. Modi's Christmas Day trip to Lahore as a way of derailing the proposed comprehensive bilateral dialogue. On the other hand, there's the BJP's rhetoric, most often used by Mr. Modi himself when he was campaigning to become Prime Minister, that terror and talks can't happen side by side. So now, what should Mr. Modi do? As a former Foreign Secretary, what would be your advice to Mr. Modi?
Well, let me say straight up that I would be in favor of the talks continuing as planned and on the due date. I think that this lamentable, though the death of 7 of our uniformed men has been, I would regard this as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the two prime ministers to set their seal on a process which they have started. I think both have invested a great deal of capital in this process, and I don't think they should be diverted. I think they should continue the momentum, and I think that the meeting in Lahore gave the world, India, Pakistan and the rest of the world, a glimpse of the opportunities that exist if we can have normal relations. I just don't think this moment can be lost, because I think there is a great opportunity for India, the Pakistan government and the international community to work together to get rid of this menace of terrorism in Pakistan once and for all. Maybe that's utopian, but I think that's something to work for.
Ashraf Qazi, in an article you wrote for the Pakistani newspaper Dawn yesterday, you said that the threat that faced the comprehensive bilateral dialogue was the dead hand of the past, as well as what you called many spoilers. You also said if the leaders are unimaginative, risk-averse or unable to restrain hawkish institutions, the comprehensive bilateral dialogue will be doomed. Now, in the present circumstances, many in India believe that the onus now at this moment rests with Pakistan and Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. As a former High Commissioner to India, what would be your advice to your Prime Minister to ensure that he says or does something that keeps the process that started on Christmas Day on track?
Well, Karan, he's got to be absolutely responsive to India's concerns, because after a series of very positive developments culminating in Prime Minister Modi's visit to Lahore, this very untoward incident has taken place, which has thrown everything into jeopardy, and India's outrage is understandable. However, I understand the Prime Ministers have been in touch. The Pakistani Prime Minister has promised all possible cooperation, and I think India has communicated some information to him. So it is a great challenge for both leaders, but in this particular case for us to respond to India's concerns. Now, we don't know for sure what exactly happened, what is the provenance of this incident, but there's a lot of speculation, a lot of emotion, and it is for both leaders to ensure the good start that they made to a very good enterprise is maintained as far as is possible. I know the difficulties, I know the challenges, but we've got to meet them.
Satyapal, you were High Commissioner in Pakistan when 26/11 happened nearly 8 years ago. At the time, if I recall correctly, President Zardari, Prime Minister Jilani, as he was, rang up Dr. Manmohan Singh within 24 hours. This time round, the Pakistan Prime Minister has taken 4 or 5 days to make that phone call to Mr. Modi. But as Ashraf Qazi said, he did ensure India that all the leads India has given would be looked into, that the matter would be thoroughly investigated. Are you reassured this time by Mr. Nawaz Sharif's phone call, or do you think it was a bit late, that the response in 26/11 was a faster and quicker one?
Well, you know, when 26/11 happened, there was an immediate outpouring of sympathy in Pakistan initially, which changed quite dramatically as the narrative here developed. And responding to that, and responding to the state of play between the two countries, then the leaders, the Pakistani leaders, called up immediately, not least because the Pakistani foreign minister was then in India trying to mend fences. And so happened that Mr. Nawaz Sharif was then the leader of the opposition, called me on my phone in Delhi since I was here with the minister. So their response was immediate. But because their response was immediate, I think the civilian leadership in Pakistan had not taken other players on board. And you recall the embarrassment that the civilian leadership then had to go through, having made offers immediately to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh on which they could not deliver.
You're talking about Zardari offering to send the ISI ahead and then having to back off.
Indeed. I think it's possible that this time Mr. Nawaz Sharif, and I hope that is the reason, has consulted before he spoke to our Prime Minister.
So in other words, even if Mr. Nawaz Sharif's response looked to some Indians to be 3 days too late, it may be a better and more well thought out response.
And therefore a better prepared initiative likely to lead to greater success. One hopes so.
Mr. Dulat, it emerges that before the two prime ministers spoke to each other, the Indian NSA Ajit Doval spoke to his Pakistani counterpart, Lieutenant General Janjua, yesterday evening. Pakistan then issued a formal statement through their Foreign Office saying the government is in touch with the Indian government and is working on the leads provided by it. Now, as a man who knows how these things are done, because you've been head of RNAW, does that suggest to you that quietly and without telling the press, the two countries are actually talking, perhaps cooperating, perhaps collaborating on this terror incident?
Actually, this is exactly what I was suggesting yesterday. And one of our diplomats didn't approve of it. Because I said, you know, we've, in the last few days, we've started differentiating between dialogue and engagement. And I said, well, all right, if there is a differentiation, I don't see it really, but if that is so, and if you want to curtail the dialogue for the time being, meaning the Foreign Secretary level talks, at least the NSAs must meet immediately. Means the engagement must continue.
So can I interrupt? So when you discover from the Pakistani side, not the Indian side, that India has already shared leads and the Pakistan government is committed to working on it, do you get the feeling that behind the scenes, actually the two governments are taking steps to cooperate and collaborate?
I hope they are, because I think this is exactly what is required. And I think whether the Foreign Secretary level talks take place or not, or are delayed, I feel they should take place, like Ambassador Srinivasan said. But if they are to be delayed, there should be no delay in the NSA's meeting. And I said so yesterday, that this does not necessarily have to be publicized. The quieter it is, the better it would be.
Ashraf Qazi, I'll come to you one more time before I come to the two politicians who are on the panel with me. A key concern in India is that the Pakistani military establishment, or the ISI to be more specific, were perhaps aware of the Pathankot attack, or possibly at any rate supportive of it. In your Dawn article, which I referred to a moment ago, you said, in the case of Pakistan, the civilians have to be on the same page with the military. The question is, are they on the same page? There are even some reports in India, although I can't vouch for their veracity, that General Raheel Sharif might have been aware of the Pathankot attack. How do you respond to that concern which is, as you know, a very key concern in Delhi tonight?
Well, we've certainly had this problem, but I do not know that it is relevant to what has happened just now with regard to Pathankot. So I would be speculating if I were to sort of venture an answer to your very specific question. What is required, I will say, that whatever the challenge is, the Prime Minister of Pakistan must rise to them in order to sustain the building of trust with India, which is going to be a very onerous task for both sides, because, as I mentioned in the article, trust at present is zero. It's probably gone down to minus. So restoring it requires us to deal with any and every challenge that we confront.
You know, you've said something twice, Mr. Qazi, that's been very striking to Indian ears. You said the Prime Minister of Pakistan must rise to the challenge and reassure India. And you said something very similar in your first answer. Is this a common view in Pakistan, or are you slightly pushing the boat in taking this stand?
No, I think, as your former Foreign Secretary said, initially, even after 26/11, he found the response in Pakistan to be sympathetic, and you have exactly the same response, especially amongst the intelligentsia in Pakistan today. There are, of course, a number of voices which are skeptical in the extreme, but that's reflective of the state of relations we've had for so long.
Okay.
And this is an incident that has taken place in India, and that is why I'm talking about this taking place in the aftermath of the Indian Prime Minister's visit to Pakistan. It is incumbent upon us not to accept each and every charge, but to do our very best to sustain the relationship that seemed to be moving in the right direction after a long while.
Mr. Chari, you've heard what
And this, of course, is a mutual obligation.
Mr. Chari, you've heard what Ashraf Qazi, a former Pakistan High Commissioner to India, but I should mention also a former ambassador to China, to Russia and the United States, has just said that the Prime Minister of Pakistan must rise to the challenge of reassuring India. Now, in contrast, and this is also equally reassuring, Mr. Modi has been cautious and restrained. He blamed what happened in Pathankot on the enemies of humanity. He hasn't named Pakistan once. Against those two comments, do you believe, Mr. Chari, that the talks should continue, or should they be postponed, or should the NSA talks precede talks between the foreign secretaries? What's your opinion on that key question about the talks?
I think what the move that has been initiated by the Prime Minister of India is very good and very laudable, and there is across the board belief that we should have a peace process with Pakistan continue. Therefore, I think the peace process should continue, and I do agree that the Pakistani Prime Minister is now, the ball is in his court, and he should rise to the occasion, and he should come up and accept the facts. I think all these meetings should go on. Not more importantly, the NSA of Pakistan, it is due for the NSA of Pakistan to come to India and hold talks with the NSA in India in continuation of the UFA agreement. We are forgetting the UFA agreement. UFA agreement was absolutely only on talks regarding terror. I think this is the right time now to follow up on UFA agreement.
But before we go to whether it's UFA agreement that we follow, or whether it's the agreement that was signed between Sushma Swaraj and Sirtaj Aziz much more recently, let me just ask you to clarify in one word. You are for the talks continuing. You are not in favor of postponing or delaying them. Can you give me a confirmation of that?
Absolutely. I am in favor of the talks continuing, but I am not specifying whether it should be postponed or discontinued. I am not saying it should be discontinued, but we will have to wait for the response from the Pakistani side. If they want the talks to continue, I think it should continue with the talks. We should impress upon the Pakistani Prime Minister to do everything that is under his command to see that the talks continue.
Abhishek Singhvi, there is no doubt that if the Congress had been in power and the BJP in opposition, they would have demanded the scrapping of talks. They did that many times, when in fact you attempted to talk at a time when there was terror happening on the horizon. Now today, if Mr. Modi goes ahead with the foreign secretary level talks or with talks at the NSA level, and you've heard Mr. Chari say that he is wholly in favor of the talks happening, he is not in favor of postponement, will Congress in those circumstances support the government, or will you seek to embarrass the government and make political capital? Abhishek Singhvi?
Firstly, the BJP, you are absolutely right, has been very critical. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please keep speaking.
Yes. So they have been very critical. Secondly, by Mr. Modi's own standards, in the last 18 months, he should stop talks immediately, because he has stopped zigzagged on talks on every small or big or medium incident. However, we would support continued engagement. I'm not using the word talks, but continuing engagement of different kinds, subject to a caveat, Karan. The caveat is that there must be consistency in the policy, coherence in the policy, there must be no zigzags and U-turns, and simultaneously the fact that there is engagement or that there is a lunch break in Lahore by the Prime Minister should not let India hesitate to expose Pakistan in the event that we get a dossier of at least non-state actors or rogue state actors having supported this misadventure.
Can I interrupt?
I am sure
what do you mean when you say you support engagement but not necessarily talks? What is the difference you're trying to make when you say you support engagement but not necessarily talks?
No, the only slight difference I'm making is that we should not disengage. We may have a lower level talk or a different level talk to start with, and then increase the hierarchy just to show that an incident has happened. But there must be engagement, not complete break-off, as has happened in Modi's last 18 months itself.
Okay. Krishnan Srinivasan, how do you respond to that suggestion from Congress that the talks can continue, but not perhaps at the foreign secretary level, which was intended, but at a lower level? In other words, there is a deliberate downgrading, but nonetheless a continuation of the process. How do you respond to that? Or would you feel that that would in fact be handing a minor victory to the terrorists, who will then be able to claim they reduce the level of talks, if not stop it altogether?
Yes, of course I do. I think that the talk should continue as has been decided by the leaders of the two countries, by the persons they've nominated, and at the time they've indicated. I don't think there needs to be any slippage in this, because our experience shows that slippages lead to long slippages, postponements, and eventually they derail the entire process. I think there's a certain degree of virtue in sticking to a schedule which has already been decided. And I don't think the two prime ministers would want these discussions to be derailed at this point when they've hardly got started. I think we really need to keep up the momentum, and I think the two prime ministers, who've taken, as I said, great risks to get this going, I think need to make these discussions shock-proof.
There's a view, Satyabrat Pal, expressed in today's Business Standard by their strategic editor Ajay Shukla, and I want to quote him. He says that New Delhi's penchant for calling off talks in response to a serious terror strike provides an incentive to jihadi groups to launch more such strikes. In other words, calling off the talks at this stage will not prevent terror, it could provoke terror, because it will give a clear indication to jihadi groups that they now have a weapon by which they can stop India ever having talks with Pakistan. Do you agree with that view?
I completely agree, and this is something that I've argued on television and in writing, in print, for several years now, ever since I came back from Islamabad. Quite clearly, at the moment, for the last 3 or 4 years, we've given terrorists a veto. They determine when India and Pakistan will engage and on whose terms. And therefore, if we are to take the initiative, wrest the initiative back from them, as the two prime ministers have done, they need to stay the course.
So the argument that in fact the correct response to terror is call off talks, that will somehow stop the terror, is actually completely mistaken and fallacious.
I think it's completely foolish.
What about something else? politicians are also very susceptible to public opinion. And sadly, public opinion is whipped up either by television channels and newspapers who bay for blood, or by the belief through social media, and I emphasize the word, it's only a belief, that somehow the country says, no, we can't possibly talk to Pakistan. Do you think this government, this Prime Minister will be susceptible to that sort of pressure, A, from the media, and B, from social media and public opinion as a whole?
Of course he would be, but I think the media, if I might say so, has been extremely well managed this time. In fact, it has been very reasonable, very moderate. And if you noticed yesterday, almost every newspaper in the country, national newspaper, brought out an editorial suggesting that talks must continue, must never break down. So I think as far
what
as...
What about TV channels saying, is Nawaz Sharif sincere? Can Nawaz Sharif be trusted?
That's an old story that we keep hearing, you know.
But it's such channels that sometimes can sway the mood and mind of politicians who are anyway in two minds.
Actually, there's a more basic problem here, and that is that we just talked about, you know, the veto of terrorists. The problem here in the Indian perception is that, you know, whenever we talk about terrorism or terrorists coming from across, then it gets linked immediately to the Pakistani establishment, to the military, to the ISI. And we have still not accepted that they may be rogue elements or non-state actors. And even if they are non-state actors, they are still being controlled by the state or used by the state. I think that is where the real problem lies. Now, in this particular case, in fact, there was a very interesting write-up today in one of the papers where it was explained by a Kashmiri journalist that in this particular case, it might be much easier for Pakistan to provide help because the Jaish is not one of their favored militant outfits.
Quite right.
And I think that's a very positive sign to take up.
Let me put that particular thought to Ashraf Qazi. Ashraf Qazi, do you agree with the view that unlike 2611, where the LET was responsible this time round, because the Jaish is supposed to be the perpetrator, it might be easier for the Pakistani establishment to cooperate and deliver justice because Jaish is not their favored proxy, if I can use that phrase. And therefore, the effort the Pakistanis will put in to collaborate will be more obvious and also more convincing to the Indian side?
No, I'm not going to look at it that way. What I do believe is that both Prime Ministers are confronted with a challenge right now. As I mentioned, our Prime Minister, if he gets credible information, he needs to follow it up to see as much as is possible what actually did happen. Is the evidence or information given him sound, and then to take the necessary action. On the other hand, the Indian Prime Minister does need to realize that in view of the public opinion and in India, if there is no credible evidence with linking this incident with Pakistan or Pakistan's territory, then in some manner that should also be conveyed, you know, in a manner that may not be definitive because investigations are carrying on. But he should not allow people to speculate negatively, which will then provide a dynamic of its own. So I think both have to act in a very responsible fashion under a lot of pressure. And if that happens, then we can deal with any challenge.
One more question before I lose you, because I think I'm going to lose the line to Pakistan in a couple of minutes. What would be the mood and response in Pakistan if eventually the talks are called off or postponed?
Oh, it would be very negative. It would be that, you know, India hasn't proved anything against Pakistan, and India, either deliberately or in response to, you know, a charged public opinion, has sort of allowed that to take the decision away. I think there's an expectation that Narendra Modi will be a strong leader. In this respect, he's made his commitment. It took a lot of people by surprise. He must see this thing through until it becomes clear that circumstances are as bad as many people in India think it might be. I hope it is not, but if it is, we will also have to rise to the occasion. We have undertaken obligations towards each other. We must fulfill them.
Very quickly on this issue, Mr. Chari, how good, how clinching is the evidence we have that points a finger at the Jaish and at other actors and players in Pakistan? I know we're relying on transcripts, I know we're relying on phone conversations, I know we're relying on some equipment that we've got, shoes and other ammunition, but how clinching do you believe it is?
I think the evidence is very clinching. I mean, it's always possible for the Pakistani establishment to say that these non-state actors actually do not belong to us and they are not actually under our control and the army is incapable of handling them. Look, we are also targets of terrorism and we are also victims like you, this, that. So many other reasons they can give. But there is enough evidence that these people have been operating from close to the border. They have been keeping a tab on the Indian establishment. They have also been very active. There are sleeper cells within this country, and the government after government has also brought out dozens on these issues. And we have enough evidence as far as these non-state actors are concerned, and also their close linkage with the Pakistani establishment, the army, and the ISI.
Okay.
So we cannot say. And if you juxtapose this incident with what happened yesterday, day before yesterday in Kabul, and today in Jalalabad, you can always see that the servants are different, but the masters are the same. So there is ample proof, but it's very unfortunate that even senior diplomats from Pakistan keep on repeating that you will have to give us enough evidence. I don't think this line will work as far as a long-standing...
Well, forgive me, I'm going to interrupt you there. I think diplomats are perfectly justified if they say you have to give us evidence if you want us to act. You simply can't expect us to act because the Indian government says we've done it. That's an understandable position, even if you as an Indian don't like it. We would take the same position ourselves if the situation had been reversed. So I don't think we should make that particular point tonight. Let me very quickly bring you in, Abhishek Singhvi. Your party has repeatedly suggested through innuendo and sometimes even by open statement that in fact the visit over Christmas as well as the process that began in Paris in November was a result of pressure from Washington, pressure from London. Now, what do you believe will be the nature of pressure on Mr. Modi about continuing the talks?
Our criticism has been very constructive and very measured. I must remind you, Karan, before I leave this, before I go further, that unfortunately after 26/11, Mr. Modi, the then Chief Minister, held a press conference in Mumbai criticizing the 26/11 episode from our side. But that apart, our criticism is firstly that there has been complete zigzag, lack of coherence and consistency since the day of his swearing.
But my question was
Secondly,
a different question.
That there is ample evidence to suggest that these sudden knee-jerk things, whether they happen in Thailand, no, I'm answering that, whether it happens in Thailand between the NSA or subsequent to that, this sudden visit, there seems to be evidence to suggest that these sudden changes and leaps happen because of some pressure from elsewhere, mainly USA. Because there's no reason why suddenly, you cut off everything on a small incident and you suddenly start off at Bangkok and then you suddenly go to Lahore. Thirdly, no ground preparation is done for these things.
Yeah.
Because they are
but
sudden,
please answer my question rather than use this as an opportunity to speak on every issue that comes to your mind. Do you believe there will be now intense international pressure, particularly from London and Washington, to continue with the talks? Answer that.
Well, I hope and trust that all that we will do is do on our own volition. Given the last few weeks, we have evidence to believe that the pressure is international. We totally oppose it. We should do it because we want to do it. Okay. It has been our policy, the Congress very consistently in power and in opposition, that we must engage. And we must engage because we want it. Certainly, all elementary rules of bilateralism, which has been our creed from the Shimla agreement and before, would be destroyed if we are going to do things under US or UK or international pressure. That would be catastrophic.
We're discussing the prospect of India-Pakistan talks in the wake of the Pathankot terror attack. We turn now to the question, is this becoming a challenge, a test for Mr. Modi himself in very personal terms? Krishnan Srinivasan, what's your answer to this question? Is this a test for Mr. Modi's conviction, even of his nerve?
Of course it is. the bigger the risk, the greater the tests. And this is, of course, wasn't completely not anticipated. Most of us, I'm sure, circles close to the Prime Minister too, knew that there would be some kind of roadblock coming up immediately as far as these talks are concerned. But Mr. Modi has, I think, learned a lot during his 20 months in office. He's learned that the situation between India and Pakistan is intensely complicated. It's not a binary situation of right and wrong, black and white. It's got to be navigated very carefully. He cannot respond to every roadblock with petulance. The talk should not be allowed to break down, and it requires bold initiatives. I think he's done a lot in the last few months to start the process, and I think myself that he will realize that this process needs momentum, it needs supervision from the top, and that's why I believe it will continue.
Satyapal, if you accept the argument given there by Krishna Srinivasan that this is a test of Mr. Modi's mettle, it's a test of his resolve, then the question I want to put to you is this: will Mr. Modi look contradictory? Could he even end up diminishing himself if he now is seen to do a U-turn and back away from his own Christmas initiative?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. When he did the Christmas initiative as the culmination of a series of other steps that he'd taken starting from Paris, that in itself raised questions in many minds here. Many of his erstwhile supporters felt that he had suddenly shown a weakness that wasn't called for. But in the view of many like me, it showed statesmanship, a willingness to admit that his past policy had led nowhere, and therefore he was taking a very constructive view of how to move forward. Now, having taken that extremely bold step, if now he were to draw back at the first obstacle, that indeed would lay him open to a charge of both inconsistency, weakness, and poor leadership.
How would it go down internationally?
Even worse, I think, than domestically, because internationally he has a certain reputation. He's created a certain image of himself as a forthright speaker, as a very determined and a resolute leader. And if he vacillates like this, then it will certainly diminish his standing.
Prime ministers in this sort of situation, when they know that their reputation's on the line, their standing's on the line, their consistency's on the line, tend to look for advice from intelligence sources. You've been head of RNAW. What sort of advice will people in RNAW and IB today be giving him about the talks?
I think it depends almost entirely on the NSA, because he's an intelligence man in that position. So it depends on how he looks at it, and I think he will look at it positively. I know him a little bit. As I look at this whole thing, I think Modi ji took too long to begin this process. It should have started earlier, but as they say, der aaye to par durust aaye. And I think now this is a real test for 2016 is going to be a big test for Prime Minister Modi. Prime Ministers, leaders are tested in times of crisis. And Vajpayee was tested 3 or 4 times. But he had that conviction that this permanent confrontation with Pakistan has to end, and that in Kashmir we need to move forward.
Does Mr. Modi have that conviction now that he faces a similar test?
Obviously, otherwise he would not have gone to Lahore. I would like to believe that he has thought it out, and he does believe that we need engagement and permanent engagement with Pakistan.
And therefore the corollary is that at the first obstacle you mustn't stumble.
Not at all.
Let me put it like this, Mr. Chari. Does the BJP, behind closed doors maybe, not in public, does it realize that this is becoming a personal test for the Prime Minister? And will the party give him room to act as he thinks fit? Or is he under pressure from elements in the RSS, from allies like the Shiv Sena, even from hardliner MPs within his own party, to do a U-turn on his Christmas position?
No, I don't think we should look at the whole issue from a very different perspective, I think.
In the first place, we always tend to look at all the Indo-Pakistan peace process and engagement, or whatever you call it, from the point of view of an individual. He spoke about Vajpayee, challenges Vajpayee faced. We speak about the challenges Dr. Manmohan Singh faces. And then we speak about Modi's personal engagement. These are all not the personal engagements of the Prime Minister of any country.
Well, just a moment. The Christmas initiative, as your government has said, was taken by Mr. Modi spontaneously at the last moment without consulting anyone.
There are Prime Ministers who have, the Prime Minister of Vajpayee has also initiated certain novel methods of Pakistan.
Question makes sense.
Dr. Manmohan Singh wanted to visit Pakistan, unfortunately he could not. But Modi, given Modi's political acumen and given Modi's capabilities in what we would call optics, Modi thought of out of the box.
But you're not answering my question. My question is, will there be pressure on Mr. Modi from within the BJP to U-turn, or will the party give him room?
Believe me, there is no pressure on Mr. Modi as far as the party is concerned or the RSS is concerned. And these elements which you are talking about, whether they are there or not, is a different issue.
Well, Shiv Sena has been writing in Samna.
But Shiv Sena is part of not the BJP. Shiv Sena is part of the NDA, and Shiv Sena has been part of many governments in before. And Shiv Sena has taken very different kinds of stand at different times. But as far as foreign policy and as far as engagement with Pakistan is concerned, I don't think these things matter. What matters is our national security and also the peace that we are talking about with Pakistan.
Abhishek Singhvi, Congress has demanded that the government must brief all political parties. In response, what I want to ask you is this: are you prepared at this critical moment, a testing moment for the Prime Minister, as at least 3 speakers have made clear, to actually stand up and support his Pakistan policy if he shows consistency and he continues to engage? Or will you then start accusing him of not standing up for India's interests, for not living by what he had said when he was an opposition leader? I'm coming back to that key question because in addition to public opinion, he will also be worried about how the opposition responds.
Karan, to your question, we have actually walked the talk. We have done what we said. We have actually supported him much, much more than any opposition party, including his own, when he was in opposition and supported the Congress. We have said what again? Even now, we opposed his disengagement. We said if you are now consistent, coherent and clear, we will support you. But foreign policy in this country from Nehruvian times, and that is the pillar, has been much more consistent and bipartisan than any other sector of Indian economy or Indian polity. He has to understand that he must make it more and more bipartisan. He has unfortunately been naturally and by nature and by temperament a person who is much more unilateral. We have criticized him recently, for example, that even within his own party, he has excluded the cabinet committees on security and politics. He has made it into a
stick
PMO
to my question,
initiative.
Abhishek Singhvi. I asked you a specific focus question.
Kind of
Don't use it as an excuse to talk about everything and anything.
But we will support if he becomes more bipartisan.
Okay.
Look, I have said so earlier, we will support it if he's more bipartisan, but that's not his temperament. We will support it if he's more consistent and coherent. That has been not the track record for the last 18 months. How can I be more clear than that?
Okay, that is actually now a very clear answer. You will support him provided he's consistent. Krishnan Srinivasan, one possibility that's being speculated is that Mr. Modi might ask the Pakistanis to arrange a NSA level meeting prior to the foreign secretaries. Whether that would mean the foreign secretaries being postponed by a week or 2 or not, I don't know. But would that from your perspective make sense, or would it be a spoiler in Pakistani eyes and therefore not worth attempting?
Well, I'd be a little unhappy if that was so, and certainly if it was a kind of precondition to having the foreign secretaries talks, because it's obvious that as you mentioned yourself, the national security advisors are in touch with each other already. I'm not quite sure what what purpose another meeting is going to serve. Well, if it is considered useful by both sides, I don't see any objection to it. But if it is necessary, why not have it at the same time as the foreign secretary's meeting, so that both the tracks can proceed together? I would be very loath to see the roadmap track disappearing in the overall discussions on terror. I hope that we won't press this issue to a point where the foreign secretaries don't meet the appointed time and the appointed place.
You understand and know the thinking of Pakistan better than anyone else on my panel. How do you think the Pakistanis would respond if Mr. Modi were to say, I'd like the two NSAs to meet before the foreign secretaries?
No, I completely agree with Mr. Srinivasan. Given the history and the bad blood over the last aborted NSA's meeting, if we were now to say, let's have the NSAs meet first, the immediate reaction, even if the government of Pakistan understands our compulsions, the immediate reaction in the rest of the Pakistani polity, certainly in the media, and of course in many other influential segments of society, would be that the Indians had brought in the original demand by the back door. It's best not to. I mean, there are many ways of having the security agencies talk and meet, but it does not have to be a formal meeting of the NSAs just now.
You said a moment ago that you know the NSA a little. Do you think the NSA understands this key point made both by a former High Commissioner to Pakistan and a former Foreign Secretary, that insisting on NSA's meeting first would scupper the process?
I'm sure he does. When I suggested that the NSA should meet if the foreign secretaries don't, it's just because we've been differentiating between engagement and dialogue, and I'm of the view that even if there is a little distinct to dialogue at this point of time, engagement must never stop. And also, you will see as time goes by, if this relationship is to develop and move forward, the NSAs will meet much more often. And it could then
But you're talking about something after the process starts. We're talking now about something that becomes a precondition.
I am presuming the process started with Modi ji's visit to Lahore.
And will continue.
And will continue.
So therefore it doesn't matter if the Indian side says let the NSAs meet first.
Don't have to say it, we just meet. This could
issue,
become a back
how
channel.
important is it for the BJP that an NSA meeting now after Pathankot precede the foreign secretaries? Or does it not matter? Can the two meet together as happened in Bangkok? Or can you just continue with the talks and the NSAs meet in February as they were meant to meet?
No, I think the NSA meeting has also to take place now. But it will be very unfortunate if Pakistani establishment does not allow that to happen, because given the previous example,
can they meet at the same time as the foreign secretaries?
No, they can meet at the same time. They can also meet before, and they can also decide to meet after the foreign secretaries meet. They can decide to meet after the foreign secretaries
But they already have indicated they'll meet in February.
They have indicated that they will meet in February.
So can you stick to that schedule? Can you stick to that schedule?
No, these circumstances are different. Therefore, we can stick to the schedule if the NSA agrees that yes, in these changed circumstances, the NSA level meeting should take place, and we are prepared for it.
But hang on a second, I'm asking you for clarity. Are you saying that the NSAs must meet first, or at least at the same time as the foreign secretaries?
No, I think we will get bogged down on all these conditions and preconditions if you do this. But it is enough if the NSAs agree that in the changed circumstances we must meet either along with the foreign secretaries or immediately after the foreign secretaries,
Mr.
or
Chari,
if possible before. But
Mr.
there has
Chari,
been an
you
instance.
are a diplomat, sir.
No,
you're
I'm not a
saying
diplomat.
it very cleverly, but what you're indicating is two things. It's important for the NSAs to meet, but the NSA's meeting mustn't be a precondition for the foreign secretaries. An agreement to meet even after the foreign secretaries would be good enough.
In the
I
changed
won't let you spoil the good impression you've created by clarifying, because I'm sure that I've understood you and the audience has understood you well, and I applaud you for your diplomacy, because it was a difficult question which you answered very effectively. My thanks to all my guests for joining me. My thanks also to Krishnan Srinivasan, Abhishek Singhvi, and earlier Ashraf Ghazi. If you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.
Pictures of the Parliament building in Delhi, pictures of Rajpath, pictures of several other sensitive...